Hello and welcome to As It Comes, life from a musician's point of view. I'm Davina, I'm a freelance cellist based in London, and lately I've been watching a lot of sport on TV. It's nice to have the time to do so, and I've been treated to the ATP Finals tennis matches and the Autumn Nations Rugby Cup. I hadn't heard of it either. It's like the Six Nations but with Georgia and Fiji, curiously. If you're listening from either one of those countries, I'd love to hear from you. From a musician's point of view, we've gotten used to performances in front of no one, whether it be live streams or performing to empty venues. That is, the ones that are lucky enough to still be running this year. But of course, in many places in the world, sports matches too are going ahead without the spectators. That colourful, roaring conglomerate pulsating from the arena stands. Gone. As musicians, we've been lamenting the lack of audiences in music making, and we've realised how crucial the collective engagement is in creating the atmosphere and energy that makes live performance so attractive. So I wonder how sports people are finding the lack of spectators while they play. I mean, sure, it's probably nice to not have rival team spectators shouting offensive slurs at you when you're trying to do your job, but I'm sure many teams are missing that atmosphere of the crowd supporting you and having your back, much like musicians. What I found interesting, though, is that the matches that I've been watching have gone to lengths to replicate the feeling and sound of being at a sports match. At the tennis, they have fake clapping at the end of every point. The stadium flashes lights and blasts music, like a nightclub, while the players take a rest. While watching the rugby, I could opt to watch with something called Stadium FX, which is just generic crowd noise of people hollering. But of course, there's no one there. So imagine if classical musicians took a leaf out of this book and had something called Concert Hall FX. I know for some of the televised BBC Proms performances, they put in applause from people watching outdoors on a big screen in parks around the country, probably to disguise the fact that the performers were playing to an empty Albert Hall. But let's not stop there. Don't forget the barrage of coughing in between movements. The person who decides to rummage through a plastic bag and open their noisy sweets in the middle of the performance. Haribo. The awkward smattering of applause between movements from people who aren't sure if they should clap. As well as the disapproving from those who have refrained. And to finish things off, let's have a button programmed of people going, interspersed with the voice of one person, probably a man, going, "Bravo!" at the end of the encore. So there you go. Concert Hall FX. You heard it here first. All rights reserved, Davina Shum, 2020. Please direct inquiries to asitcomespodcast@gmail.com. My guest this week is Sarah Watkins. She's a pianist based in Auckland. She was actually one of my lecturers back when I was at the University of Auckland, where she teaches. Specialising in collaboration, she spoke to me about the challenges of accompanying via recording and teaching piano via Zoom when you can't see your students' feet. She provides a lovely insight into musician life in post-COVID New Zealand. Because, of course, New Zealand is functioning on a level that's almost back to normal. Try not to be jealous when you hear about Sarah's week involving touring, performing in front of audiences, working with other people, leaving the house, and New Zealand scenery, accompanied by the sounds of birds chirping outside her dad's place in Christchurch, where she chatted to me. Along with violinist Andrew Beer, Sarah has recorded an album of contemporary New Zealand works called 11 Frames, which, since this conversation was recorded, has just won the Aotearoa Music Award for Best Classical Artist. It's a tremendous achievement, and we chat about the state of New Zealand composition in this day and age, and how multi-culturalism continues to influence New Zealand's musical voices. Here's my chat with Sarah. Sarah Watkins, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight / your today, because you're in Christchurch, all the way in New Zealand. It's really lovely to see you, and I have to ask first of all, because New Zealand continues to be the envy of the world in many different things, many different ways, with life seemingly almost back to normal in a lot of respects compared to here in the UK and other places in the world. What have you been up to in the past week?
Gosh, well, hey, it's great to see you and to chat with you, Davina. Yes, I agree. We are so lucky here in New Zealand, and I can never take that for granted. You know, I think we've done an extraordinary job of kind of keeping things under control, even if, you know, some people see our lockdown measures as being on the forceful side. I don't think anybody in New Zealand would begrudge what we're able to do now. And yeah, it was a pretty tough few months there for a while, coming in and out of lockdown. And of course, living in Auckland, we had a second crack at it.
Oh, of course.
Just recently. Yeah.
We might be doing the same thing shortly in a few weeks' time. I wouldn't be surprised.
We went hard for that first month and a bit, and then we got out of lockdown, and it was, you know, really, it did feel like things were pretty much back to normal, with concerts resuming, which is fantastic. Yeah. And then, as I say, Auckland went into a second lockdown, which meant, unfortunately, all the concerts that I was looking forward to doing had to be rescheduled. So you asked me what I've been up to this week. Well, I've had 5 concerts in the past 6 days.
Oh, my God.
And that's kind of 5 different, I know, like a little bit of overkill.
So it's like you're hitting the ground running, basically. Come out of lockdown, and all those concerts that you were going to do, let's do them all now.
Let's do them over Labour weekend. Yeah, so Thursday night I was playing piano in the APO, the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. We did Prokofiev's 7th Symphony, which was fantastic, just gorgeous symphony. Yeah. So that was Thursday night. Then Saturday and Sunday I went to the Lower North Island with Andrew Beer, who's the concertmaster of the APO, and we did a couple of fantastic house concerts in Greytown and Palmerston North. So, you know, chucking a little bit of Kreutzer Sonata there, and some New Zealand pieces off our CD, and Clara Schumann, more Prokofiev, gorgeous stuff. Then Monday night it was a viola recital, also at Rannoch, with it was more kind of English flavoured, actually. We had Arnold Bax in there, and some it was almost like a tribute to Lionel Tertis, so some of his little arrangements, which are, you know, really kind of luscious, beautiful, sort of salon style pieces.
I have to say, having lived in the UK for 7 years, the English composers do viola music very well and very prolifically. There's a lot of it.
They do. That's beautiful. And actually a really early work by a New Zealand composer, Alfred Hill, who, you know, we over here think of Douglas Lilburn as being the father of New Zealand music, but actually Alfred Hill was up and doing stuff in the late 1800s. This piece was written 1891, I think, which was just before the Brahms sonata that we also played in the program. And it's just amazing to think, you know, here he was on this side of the world writing at the same time as Brahms. We don't tend to put New Zealand in that kind of a musical context. So.
No, of course, because anything that's over 100 years old in New Zealand is considered really, really old, isn't it?
That's right.
But like,
totally.
Also, if you would see like any similarities at all in the music, it would be really strange to think that was during a time when there wasn't this constant sharing over the internet, and there's so much content out there, and it's how do they come to these similar musical conclusions?
That's right. So, you know, he did end up going and studying in Europe, I think. So, you know, and that's another interesting thing when you think of all of the, you know, the effort and the time it took for them to get from the Northern Hemisphere to New Zealand. You know, they talk about 6 months in a leaky boat. You know, that's the classic split end song.
Yeah, of course.
But honestly, it would have taken them that long. And so then to turn around and go back and explore the world and see what was going on musically, you know, that's a big commitment.
Yeah, totally.
And then to come back. So, you know, quite an extraordinary character, I'd say.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was Monday night. And then Tuesday night, I had the last concert of a tour that I undertook with some of my APO colleagues, and this was thanks to Chamber Music New Zealand. Actually, we're really lucky. It was one of those concerts that came about as a result of the pandemic. Because we have closed our borders, we can't get any overseas performers in. Sure. without, them having to do a 2-week quarantine when they come in and all that kind of stuff.
A very expensive quarantine, I've heard.
A very expensive quarantine, yes. It's possible, but yeah, it's expensive. So a lot of New Zealand musicians have actually benefited from that and getting some concert opportunities. So we were given this tour, and it was all music from the 1920s, along with a new work by Kiwi composer and bassoonist Ben Hoadley, who wrote for, it's a very unusual combination. It was because it was a mixed program. So it was piano, violin, cello, trumpet, clarinet, and bassoon.
Wow, that's quite weird. That's like a lot of weird clefs and weird transpositions.
Yes, exactly. But it was based on the one piece that exists for that already, is the Martineau Revue de Cuisine, which is the kitchen review, which is a ballet with kitchen utensils as the prime characters. So go figure. Oh my gosh!
I didn't know about that piece. That sounds hilarious.
It's kind of hilarious, very Dada inspired, I'm sure. From the 1920s, and the pot and the lid, are happily married, and then the wooden spoon tries to come between them to break it up. And
gosh, dramas in the kitchen with inanimate objects.
Yeah. And then the pot running away with the spoon, and then meanwhile the dishcloth comes in on the act. It's just,
oh my God. It's a little bit Beauty and the Beast, isn't it?
A little bit, yes. And everything ends up okay in the end, I guess.
Of course.
But, as it does. But no, the music is great. Very entertaining. There's a tango in there, of course. You can imagine all the seduction going on between the wooden spoon and the and the pot.
Saucy times in the kitchen, yeah.
Saucy times. Hey, I see what you did there.
Yeah. How did it feel playing with musicians again?
Oh, look, it was great. I mean, that was, I have to say, one of the most challenging things I've had to do in a long time. As a collaborative pianist, it's my pleasure and joy to make music with other people. So came the lockdown, and first of all, we had to do the whole online teaching thing, which I don't know if you experienced any of that, but
I could start another podcast about my experience.
Oh, I know that's Tales of the Pandemic. Yeah. But yes, I'm sure many of your listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about, and that boy, the challenges. Yeah. It's all very well saying, well, if you've got a good microphone and everything, it makes it so much easier, and you can get on Zoom and
but I think for piano, there's the added challenge of the different camera angles you must need, right? Not to mention the sound, but also like hands.
Yep.
Probably want to see your student's face, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you want to see them kind of side on. Keyboard, absolutely, but if you can get their, what are they doing with their feet? What's happening with the pedal down there?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I have one student who I didn't see her feet for an entire term, and then it wasn't until she'd recorded a school recital, in inverted commas, where she'd been filmed completely in the frame, that she was basically on her tippy toes. I had no idea for an entire term.
Right. So,
yeah. I'm still continuing to teach her online. I have to keep telling her, now I know I can't see your feet, but just a little reminder, feet flat on the floor.
Feet on the floor. So, that was definitely a challenge. I mean, some of my students these are, my university students, they had to work on an electronic keyboard because that's what they had in their apartments, and they weren't able to have access to the university practice facilities during most of that time. So that was another challenge. The sound quality was, yes.
Yeah.
Squiffy at best.
Well, yeah, there's that thing that Zoom does where it doesn't quite register anything that's too low or anything that's too high.
Yeah, and of course you get a lot of that with piano, and you get all of it at the same time, and just the sheer density of it, the number of notes that are being played, the speed, the loudness, all of that.
Do you find it really exhausting? I mean, it must be quite an onslaught in that sense.
My goodness. The day one, I thought, how on earth am I going to do this? But we just had to go in boots and all and do it. So, the teaching side of things during our lockdown was a challenge, but a lot of students had their end of semester recitals to prepare. So all the accompanists had to prepare pre-recorded backing tracks.
Oh no! Wow!
For the students to play along with, and they had to do those groovy split screen. Here I am, here's the pianist, and submit that as their
final recital. That must be so difficult. How do you pre-record something that relies so much on, the spontaneity of being in the moment and, things like tempo changes and stuff like that? Do you just have to do it and then the person has to play with you?
That's right. I mean, for better or worse, one of the pieces was the Franck Sonata. I mean, it's like, good grief. It's one of the most expressive, dialogue-rich duos in the repertoire. I had to play it imagining what they might do, but also just ultimately kind of thinking, well, this is how I feel it, and this is how I would want to shape it, allowing for those things. Send off the video to the violinist, and then she would send back a kind of a mock-up and say, crikey, you need to understand a little bit more what the piano part's happening, or what's happening in the piano part, because you're about half a bar out. And it was so challenging for them. My trombone player had a piece that had a couple of cadenzas in the middle of it.
Oh my God.
We'd been asked we weren't allowed to split up the takes. We had to do it in one take. So
they couldn't just like pause you while he did the cadenza and then press play on you again. Oh no.
Right. Yeah, so he said, okay, well, I've timed the cadenzas, and the second one lasts 43 seconds. So I sat there, playing off my iPad, and I had my phone to one side, and I hit the timer, and 43 seconds later, and I come. It worked. I don't know how it worked.
Yeah. But I mean, I would feel like if I was having to perform a cadenza in such a restricted amount of time that it would go wrong. And then because I would be thinking like that, it probably would go wrong, I can think of something quite similar when I saw someone on a cruise ship perform a movement of a concerto with a backing track, because obviously you're not going to have an orchestra with you on a cruise ship. Yeah. And they had their backing track, and there was a 3-minute long cadenza, and he must have just perfected it to fit within that time every single night.
Yeah.
And
it's pretty amazing.
It takes away that feeling of
and if you decide in the moment that you want to stretch out a phrase or move it through, what's going to happen at the other end? It could be a total train wreck. So we all learnt a lot from that process. I think it certainly brought about a lot of great dialogue. I think that the students had to think about it a little bit more. It's like, actually, what do I need? How do I ask for that? In terms of if they wanted to phrase something a little bit differently. So obviously we couldn't do endless takes and retakes, but send a first draft and then work with it and find out what's working, what, are the tempos okay? Do they need moving? So all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's collaboration, but in just a slightly different way. And I suppose the challenge with doing anything over Zoom is just testing one's communication skills. And I guess that's a good thing, because that means that people are gaining these skills to speak about what they want in rehearsals, which I think a lot of people can struggle with, not being able to know how to ask for something.
That's right. And I think when you are in a real-time collaboration, often a pianist, especially if the pianist is a professional collaborator, and that's what we do, we're doing lots of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know, the kind of the behind the scenes, the subtly fixing things or adjusting, making all the adjustments without questioning or without the need for a conversation or a discussion around it. But if the student hasn't had that awareness or the experience playing with the piano, then it's like, oh, what's going on? So having to learn how to articulate musical requests and subtleties, the start of some good things in that regard. Not a bad thing, but boy, that was
it's a challenge. I can just imagine, I mean, I've done a little bit of playing in person with some people now, but it's just such a relief. It makes it so much easier when you're in the same room.
I know. So having gone from that whole experience, on the one hand, it was nice to be playing the piano again, because I felt like it was that thing in the other room that I didn't really want to go and talk to.
Right.
There was something about the uncertainty of what was going to be happening with music making and the concerts that I had lined up, or the ones that were cancelled. It was quite sad, actually, I think. And I'm sure a lot of musicians around the world have gone through, it's a real sense of grief in a way, for your norm and your ability to make music and share it with other people. So, I was kind of, went through various stages of what's the point? Why am I practicing? Because I don't even know if it's going to happen. Yeah. I think everyone thought initially, it's a great opportunity to learn all that repertoire that I've always wanted to learn. I've had all the time in the world. But it's like, actually, no, it's a bit hard.
Yeah, you have to have that grieving process, I think. And I think a lot of people are similar. They took a bit of a break from their instrument or from their music making, and then having taken a break by exploring other avenues such as making sourdoughs or learning other languages or various other skills. that
busting out the sewing machine and making masks.
Yeah, totally. So having had a break doing other things, I feel like a lot of people are now returning to music, remembering their initial love for that and why they do it. Right. It's really difficult to get back into it when you don't have anything coming up.
Yeah. That's right. So to finally have that when we got the org there to do our tour, which was 10 concerts, that's driving all around New Zealand. We did all the North Island concerts by car, which is great. So we had a convoy of 2 cars.
That's basically like a holiday, a working holiday.
A wee holiday. And actually all my colleagues were not New Zealand born players. So some of them, we had 2 players, they just arrived in New Zealand for their jobs at the end of February. So they were very grateful to be here and to be able to make music, but also just the chance to explore the country. But the audiences as well, I think that the sense of, yay, and maybe more of an appreciation for what they had before, but maybe hadn't fully realised and appreciated it. Sort of you take it for granted. It's like, so you can just go and hear a concert, turn on the radio and hear a live broadcast. Yeah. But if you don't have that, what do you fill the void with? So, people just came out in droves. It was fantastic.
Oh, that's really nice. What are audiences like there? Do they have to be socially distant at all?
Not at the moment, they don't.
Really? Wow.
It was initially... So to give you a bit of background, we had different levels of lockdown. So level 4 was kind of the most extreme, where you couldn't go out unless to the supermarkets or if you're an essential worker. Level 3, you could go out, but it was all contactless payment. You couldn't go sit in cafes or restaurants.
Wasn't level 3 described as level 4 but with takeaways?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you could go to McDonald's and get a takeaway, whatever.
Yeah, but you couldn't actually go into the restaurant. Yeah. Then level 2 was you could go out more, but with restrictions on meeting numbers. So that meant no more than 10 people, I think, in a group, with spaces in between groups of a metre or 2. And then level 1, which is what we're in now, where the concerts are open again to the public. I think level 2 also had, you couldn't have more than 100 people at any time. So if you were, in the Auckland Town Hall, for example, you could have only had 100 people in there. So, which is why the orchestras weren't doing live performances. So there were instances of concerts taking place in level 2 where they might do 2 performances so that they could get 100 into the first performance and another 100 in the second. It was decided that we couldn't do our tour unless we were in level 1 because there was going to be more than 100 people, which worked, except that Auckland went into that second lockdown and we stayed on a little bit, so we had to reschedule the Auckland concert to the very end, which was just as well because we're all Auckland based. Okay. Would have been a bit sad.
So it's just like you're returning home for
I know,
that
it's
one.
like, yay. Yeah, kind of lovely way to end the tour. So we just finished that on Tuesday night. But great to be out making music again. But tell you what, I was tired.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially after you have your several months of lockdown and you lose your capacity somewhat to be working loads and loads and loads. And then to do, 6 concerts, 5 concerts in 6 days? Then it's a sudden test on your facility again, isn't it?
Your physical stamina, your mental stamina. It's that concentration that you just haven't had to engage in such a long time. It's like, be careful what you wish for. Yeah. So I think it's like my body was out of practice. And, and I'm someone who, as you may remember, tends to do 101 things all at once. And, lots of recitals on at the same time and, with student exams and all of that thing coming up. Gisborne competitions, it's like I have quite a capacity for undertaking a lot of playing at once. But this was another whole level of hard. I was like, I've forgotten. I've had to rebuild my training. It's like I've started training for the marathon or something again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely there are parallels with being an athlete there because it's just like anything. You've got to train to be a musician. You've got to keep in shape. And when you stop doing it, then you get worse. And then you have to just keep doing it. You've got to keep up that level in order to...
That's right.
I mean, like I had to go on a train today and I'm mentally exhausted.
And it's like, people.
Who are these people?
I know. And it's just, in some ways, it's the overload of the senses. And I think if a good thing could have come out of the lockdown process was that, just having to actually slow down and listen and be quiet and appreciate and go for walks
Yeah.
Greet your fellow walkers from a distance, with a wave and a smile, and kind of going back to that slightly simpler time, because I think in a way, I don't want to say that we've brought this upon ourselves, but there is an element of the world having gotten to such a crazy pace of doing things that we're all just kind of constantly in a state of catch up and running and going from here to there and everywhere at 100 miles an hour. And it's like, how long can we keep that up?
Exactly. It's just wondering how sustainable that is, because I would say most musicians get into the music industry because they love what they're doing, but then you get to that point where you're so busy that it can be easy to forget why you get into this field.
That's right.
And it has, in some ways, taken a global pandemic for a lot of people to realize how much they miss it. Like you were saying before with live audiences, you take it for granted a little bit. It's a bit like, well, this is a thing that I do for work and I'm doing all right, so things are fine. But then when your industry vanishes, then it's all gone.
No. And I so feel for my colleagues and friends around the world. I mean, like I say, I am so grateful for how things are here in New Zealand. And yes, the arts have been gutted. And, there's a lot of things have been cancelled and a lot of people really struggling. But, it's getting back slowly but surely. And I think there is support for it to come along. And it's giving local artists greater opportunities, I think. So I can imagine next year the orchestras in New Zealand will be featuring a lot of New Zealand and Australian soloists and conductors, which is great. Yeah, we've been having a big push on supporting local, and that initially has meant go out into your community, go back to the cafes and the small shops and the businesses that have been really hurting. But now that also means, support local musicians and all our wonderful creatives that have been doing all these great things that you may not have been aware of. Just go out there and get them behind.
I am noticing the sense in many different countries in the world, but music really returning back to its grassroots. And, if big institutions aren't able to function at the moment in a lot of places, then the core element of music making is at least getting together with the people in your close circle to do some chamber music or something fun.
Chamber music, exactly. It's like it's a great opportunity to just make music in small groups and find the opportunities, and lots of house concerts. Yeah,
fostering those relationships with people that can facilitate those opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. You're not getting back on a treadmill of sorts. So I think things will be different going forward. It's we can't go back to how things were. It's if we think about what you were doing a year ago. If you could, the crystal ball gazing, that was like nobody saw this coming. Yeah,
for sure. And in a way, I'm quite happy this year compared to some aspects of my life last year. But as you say, running on that treadmill, and there were things that I was very grateful back then, but also, I don't really miss being in 5 different cities in as many days as I was last year. And I quite like being able to sleep in the same bed every night. That's quite nice. Yes. So as you mentioned before, supporting local artists and New Zealand artists, you've released an album recently with the violinist you mentioned before, Andrew Beer, concertmaster of APO, called 11 Frames. And it features contemporary works from New Zealand composers. So running on this theme here, what made you decide to make this recording featuring New Zealand artists?
Andrew and I have done a few concerts over the years, and Andrew's from Canada originally, and he's been concertmaster of the APO for about 7-8 years now, I think. He's always really enjoyed getting to know New Zealand compositions through the orchestra, but also we did a tour quite early on, and we performed a piece by a Canadian composer, and we also commissioned Leonie Holmes, who's an Auckland composer and a colleague at the university, to write a work for us, which she did, and it was great. It's called Dance of the Wintersmith, and for you Terry Pratchett fans out there, it's took inspiration from a character in one of his books. Beautiful work, and that went on to be, I think it was a finalist in the Sounds Contemporary Award the following year, which was fantastic. And anyway, Andrew and I just sat down one day and thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great to make a CD? He hadn't ever done one before. Great, what do we do? And he's like, well, what about New Zealand works? let's talk to Rattle Records. Rattle's a great supporter of Kiwi composers and performers. So we looked at all the existing repertoire, picked the ones that we liked, and we commissioned another 3, I think, Josiah Carr and Reuben Jellyman, 2 emerging talents, big talents. Juliet Palmer, who's a Canadian-based Kiwi composer, so there was that nice kind of connection between Canada and New Zealand again.
Yeah.
But also Gao Ping, Gillian Whitehead, Anthony Ritchie, Anthony Watson, Alex Taylor, just, fantastic composers in there. And we came up with this quite lovely CD. So,
quite lovely, if I say so myself.
Quite lovely.
Yeah.
And we're terribly excited because it's up for the Classical CD of the Year, the Music Awards in a couple of weeks. So keep your fingers crossed, everybody.
That's very exciting. Congratulations on your nomination. Yeah. So you've worked with lots of New Zealand composers over the years.
Yeah.
What sort of trends or themes have you noticed emerging from these composers, if any?
Yeah. It's a really good question because in some ways it's an impossible one to answer. Because from my take, one of the great things about New Zealand composers and the whole composition community is this real encouragement to find one's own voice. And there's no real sense of wanting to sound like one, or you might be inspired by certain composers around you, whether that's in New Zealand or abroad. But I do feel like there's just so many strong voices which are quite individual.
That's really interesting that you say that, actually, because I think with countries that have a much older school of composition, it's really easy to think of those nations, isn't it? The French school, the Russian school, the German school, etc. But it's nice to think that New Zealand's this melting pot of
That's exactly the word that was in my head then. It's a melting pot of all of that, but also we're so close to the Asia-Pacific communities as well. So there's a great sense of being able to tap into our connections with China and Pacific Islands, and of course even our indigenous music and writing and instruments, tanga poro, these gorgeous sounds and tonalities, and all of that is sort of coming to the fore in collaborations and musical style as well. If I were to see any trends, I think there's a lot of wonderful lyricism returning, very expressive writing, but also some really great kind of miniatures and minimalism and exploration of micro sounds and micro languages. And I'm thinking of Reuben Jellyman, who wrote for us a tiny little variations. And, probably the whole work is about 3 or 4 minutes, and it's 4 or 5 variations on this little theme, and they're just sort of very fleeting and wispy gestures and delicate, transparent sounds. And then you get the full-blown, Gareth Farr gamelan style, which is just kind of like, which is fantastic.
He's a percussionist, wasn't he? So.
He was a percussionist, yeah. And, really inspired by the whole gamelan scene of Indonesia. And, just, it's great.
That's really comforting, isn't it? It's just, you can't really define what New Zealand music is because it's just very diverse.
And I'm sure, maybe some of our leading composers who've, watched the development, I think of dear Eve de Castro Robinson, for example, and Dame Gillian Whitehead. I'm sure they've got a great sense of, what has been happening and what they've seen emerge over the past 30, 40 years. But I think they would say the level of creativity and individuality is amazing. And I was lucky enough to be on the panel for the Sounds Contemporary Award this past year, which was just awarded a couple of nights ago, actually. We were given scores. They were blind scores, if that makes sense. So we didn't know who they were.
Oh, right, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. Yeah, so
we were given a score, but we weren't allowed to look at it.
Yes. So we could see the score, we could listen to the recording if there was one, or a MIDI mock-up. We didn't know who the composers were, but boy, the inventiveness and the variety, and it just is like, wow, New Zealand composition's in great shape. Some, just extraordinary works.
That's very good to hear. There is a future for that.
It sure is.
And it's nice to think about how, as you mentioned before, Alfred Hill doing his thing in the late 19th century, not even that long ago, and then moving on to Lilburn, and how much composition in New Zealand has evolved even though I say we, like I'm not there at the moment, but I still consider myself as New Zealander. But, you know, even though we as a country are so isolated from the rest of the world, and it has been a tool in this evolution of different voices.
Totally.
Cool.
And just, you know, this rich creativity. It's fantastic. We're really proud of the CD in terms of just the sound quality, but also just the level of composition that we were presented with. And, you know, we're grateful for the support that we got to make that all happen, and grateful to the composers for their fantastic music. So we'll have to do another one. Yeah. How's the lockdown been for you? I mean, what's your...
Oh, my goodness. Well, it was pretty hardcore, as it was for the whole world in March. And then restrictions did ease somewhat. So in June, people were starting to venture out. And then summer, I think people went a bit mad over summer. I loved summer. I had a wonderful summer because everyone was free. You know, I could see people in sort of isolated groups.
Yeah.
And then I think people are starting to get a little bit more ambitious with music making. So there are a few little chamber things going on. I'm quite lucky. I've got some concerts coming up week after next, which is nice. That's why I had to get on a train today, because I had to go to rehearsal. Yes.
Great.
But, I mean, the infection rate is rising higher and higher and higher. So I wouldn't be surprised if we go the same way as France or Germany.
Yeah.
Back into another national lockdown. Like you, I'm feeling very grateful for the little bits of stuff that I am doing, and it's just nice to work towards something. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, don't lose sight of the big picture, even if it means that our little bubbles, that's become kind of our go-to word down here.
We've adopted that term. I think ever since New Zealanders started using it, they were like, "Oh, that's a word that people can understand."
Yes,
bubble.
But even if you are in your wee bubble, it's like keep those connections happening, and just you don't get too insular. Keep reaching out, keep communicating, keep making that music, even if it is, and on a smaller scale. It's there. We don't want to lose it.
As I mentioned to you, there are some surprise questions coming up. So each of my podcast episodes, I have a segment called the Wildcard Question Round, where you have the opportunity to choose what I ask you next based on 3 topics that I present you.
Okay.
So your choices are, these are the topics: favourite repertoire, your day in food, and if you weren't a musician.
Oh, gosh. I'm going to go with my day in food.
Excellent. I love when people choose the food questions, because I'm very passionate about food. I ate so much food before speaking to you, actually. I was like, got to have some dinner before I speak to Sarah. I don't want to have this conversation hungry.
Hold on, I need something. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
No. Can you tell me, what was the last thing you ate? I know you had breakfast recently.
I did.
And what are you going to eat next?
What am I going to eat next? That's a mystery to me, because yes, I'm staying at my dad's house, so I don't know what's in the fridge.
But you can do like the forage.
I could do the forage.
I reckon like the fridges of parents are always so well stocked.
Yes, things in there. Yes,
yeah.
And I know there's some lovely looking fruit in the bowl. We're just at the end of mandarin season, kiwi fruit, of course. I can tell you that what I last ate was I went to a little cafe and I had, the dish was called Gorgeous George. I think it's called Gorgeous George, and it was smashed potatoes with a couple of eggs and bacon on top. So yeah, nothing like a good old fry up.
Oh wow, that sounds amazing.
It wasn't the most healthy thing. Normally for my breakfast, I'll soak oatmeal overnight with almond milk and cinnamon and all that kind of good stuff with some fresh fruit on in the morning. So that's my usual healthy go-to breakfast. But yeah, not this morning. No, that was. But
when you're going out for breakfast, you're not going to have something that you can just easily make yourself at home. This is why I find it so strange when you go out to a cafe and you can just buy toast with Marmite. Yeah, and it's like, why would you do that if you can why would you pay $4 or pounds or whatever to just have that out?
Yeah, no. So I'm not likely to cook spuds in the morning. So it was very enjoyable.
I like that. So smashed potatoes, were they in lieu of having a hash brown?
I think so, yeah. So it was just kind of like little roasties, which had obviously been kind of fried up. They felt like very naughty potatoes, I have to say. Yeah, and with a couple of eggs on the top with yummy bacon on the side.
Oh wow, yeah, and a nice coffee as well.
Couple of good long blacks, yes. Yeah, we.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Can't go wrong in that
Can't go
country.
wrong. No, it made
so
the
jealous.
trip over there. It was about, my dad lives quite rurally outside of Christchurch, and so we had to go all the way over to Sumner to take my partner to his course. Yeah, so it made the trip worthwhile, definitely.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Actually, I've been getting a craving for cafe-style brunches recently, and of course, in the mornings I do have more time, so I can make fairly elaborate things.
Okay.
And one thing I'm really craving at the moment is an eggs Benedict, or eggs Florentine, eggs...
Yeah.
What's the salmon one called?
Oh.
Eggs Royale.
Yes. Yeah, Florentine's with the spinach, isn't it? Spinach?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, spinach. So I've been craving that. So Mark went to the supermarket and he said, I'm going to go get some English muffins.
Ooh.
And get this, in this country, they were just labelled muffins. But then I just got confused, because then what do you call muffins here?
I know.
Muffins as well? And you're just expected to know the difference?
I did.
Or maybe it's like chips and chips in New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly. So would like chips with that. Yeah, but what sort?
Yeah. Like
cold.
hot chips or like chips?
Yeah.
Well, I'm wishing you all the best for your mystery meal in the future.
Yes, exactly.
So thank you so much for joining me tonight/tomorrow on the podcast.
I'm coming to you from the future.
I know, I'm in the past. I'm the voice of the past. Can you tell us where people can find out more about you and your album?
Well, I would say the best way to track down our album, I'm quite sure it's on Spotify if you want to look there, but if you Google Rattle Records, I think it's rattlerecords.com, and they've got all their albums on there, and you can actually listen on there. You can purchase a downloadable version of it, or you can buy a hard copy if you want, if you're old school.
Old school, yes,
old school.
CDs. Do you still buy CDs?
You can still buy CDs. It's a beautiful CD, I have to say. And I'm on the usuals. I'm mostly on Facebook. I don't tend to do Instagram and all that kind of stuff, but yeah. See what I'm up to there. You'll see lots of pictures of cats. I'm a bit of a cat nut.
I know. Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you so much. It's been so lovely chatting to you, Sarah, and thanks so much for your time.
Great to see and chat with you again too, Davina.
That was my chat with Sarah Watkins. Fun fact, Sarah is a very good Scrabble player, and for years we used to play Words with Friends. Remember that game? Anyone still play that game? She's very good. The key is knowing all the two-letter words, like ZA and XI and QI. Someone always has to drop the Q bomb at some point throughout the game. This week's Music College Didn't Prepare Me comes from an anonymous contributor in the UK with this anecdote. Music College didn't prepare me for the time I was in an orchestra and we were travelling via coach to get to a gig. It was snowing very heavily and there was an accident on the motorway, so we drove through every little town on the way to the gig. Eventually, we were going up a hill and the tyres of the bus couldn't grip the road. So about 10 people got off the bus and, with the help of some kind strangers, pushed the bus up the hill. It was appropriate that we were on our way to play the snowman. Disclaimer, I didn't actually push the bus myself. I don't think many people wake up in the morning intending to push a bus up a hill through snow, so that's definitely something that music college wouldn't prepare you for. Remember, if you have something that music college didn't prepare you for that you'd like shared or discussed on the podcast, then let me know. You can email me at asitcomespodcast@gmail.com. One final plug from me. Recently, I was lucky enough to have been interviewed by the wonderful Nadine Benjamin as part of her Facebook Live Safe at Home sessions. Nadine was my guest for episode 25, so if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I'd highly recommend it. As an NLP coach, she's got the words you need to hear if you're having a tough time. We spoke about the idea behind this podcast and how non-musical pursuits influence and inform our music making, so I'll put a link to the YouTube video if you're interested in hearing me answer questions for once, rather than dispensing them. Now I know how it feels to be one of my guests. That's it for today. Special thanks to Ros Nagy for my logo and Daniel Elms for my jingle. Huge triple word scoring thanks to Sarah Watkins for taking the time to chat to me. And as always, Thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so at asitcomespodcast@gmail.com. Like and follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at asitcomespod. Remember to rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The word podcast is starting to sound a bit strange now. And thank you for spreading the word. Chat to you soon and take good care. Bye.